Morrow of the Golden Age, Chapter 6. Before I tell you more of events taking place in our recent history, I will relay what was known of the past by the time the campaigning of the year 190 was over. Recall that thousands of years before the Golden Age ended, the exact time is unknown or may not be countable at all, the cosmic light god Manos decided to create a world. This world was to be distinct from that which came before, which is the cosmos. The cosmos was not a place where humans or anything like them could exist, and Manos is thought to have wished that the endless warring of the god beings he called his peers would not simply destroy anything material which was created. Indeed, it is likely the case that if Manos had not taken action, the cosmos itself would have ceased to exist, for wars ultimately lead to the victory of one side or the other, and the cosmic realm is the place where the essence of light and dark must exist in contrast in order to bring about distinction as a feature of things. Should light or dark prevail, it might be that the existence of things that are not all equal would be imperceptible, if not impossible. Let us leave the philosophy of the matter aside for now. Manos resolved to make a world apart from the gods that could not be destroyed or be foreign to light and dark, and in his efforts he found the best method to do this. He called upon the light god Taurus to be sacrificed in order to create a living world. However, this was not enough to create intelligent things that might understand order and benefit fully from the creation. Therefore, he called upon another to give their life in order to fulfill his vision. It was a dark god named Yimo, who is often said to have been Manos' own son, but in the original translation of the stones, he was actually revealed to be Manos' younger brother, and this, as you'll no doubt agree, is an important distinction given the tale we are attending to in this work. While Taurus knew well what Manos was going to do, Yimo was not aware of the power of sacrifice. However, the younger brother trusted the elder absolutely, and even in the final moments of his life, he did not imagine that any harm was going to come to him by following Manos' orders. This purity of thought is essential to creating the concept of order, the principle that lay at the foundation of Manos' work, and is said to be the origin of the notion of deception, such that it is an ever-present and perhaps essential feature of our world. So it was that Yimo and Taurus were ceased, and in their place came a world that contained the earth, the sun, the moon, and a colourless sphere to enclose it off from the battlefields of the cosmos. Humanity was born here too, and it is said that the first man was Yimo himself, transformed into the ideal human so that all others could be made in his image. He was too the first of the dead, so that death could be spread rightly through the world by his example. Yet this brought about an issue, for upon his death, the other humans had not finished their awakening, and there was a period of time when the world was not protected by the correct magic, for it had to be the case that at least one human was present in the world to enable it to flourish. Absent of this, the protective screen around the world began to burn, and that is what caused there to be stars. It did not burn entirely, of course, and that is because Manos put a stop to the matter by, in effect, sacrificing himself and transforming himself into a human, just as Yimo had been. Only Manos was alive, and is called in the runes the first man for this reason, despite being the second. There is more to this affair and its continuation that I shall reveal as our tale finds those shores, but we have now come to understand the threefold origin of things: Manos, Yimo, and Taurus, the three gods who were slain by their own design, so that order might come about and a world free of doom could be. This was the revelation that the Leuthosis of Gwenna had to take in, having been recently rocked by the advent of Taurus to their pantheon. Yet they were prepared for this, and each new discovery was not taken as an indication that they and their ancestors had come to be wrong on these matters, but simply that there was much new to learn, and that all of it was worth learning. In effect, that meant that the places in the world that might hold these secrets were worth visiting, and if that could only be done by force, then that was no more or less concerning than freely entering a generous city. Indeed, after Palteskia, the course of the next war was already being eagerly plotted, for the Helisii knew of other forest folk-influenced places where old descendants of the Leuthosis of the Golden Age might still be found intermingled with German invaders or the ice people of the Outer Sea. And it was the Outer Sea that cradled the next city of note which records bring to our attention. From the people of Pathless, the Bosporans learned of a distant place named Duna, which was on the coast of the Outer Sea. This was on the edge of both the First Lands and the World's End Forest, both meeting with the Black Water of the North, where no more of the world had yet been created, although it is often said that there are islands here and there in those waters. This place was inhabited by the Helisii peoples, who the Helisii considered strange and foreign compared to most of the European forest tribes. Perhaps this was not enough cause for a long expedition to find and subjugate them, but the matter was settled when a messenger arrived in winter carrying a miniature spear. This was presented as if it was a gift. The envoy could not be understood and said little. After they departed, Pyrrhosides made this event known, and someone from the city came forward to say that this gesture was a symbolic declaration of war used in ancient times. Now that the spear was given, the Helisii would do all they could to receive it from the recipient by force. Hence, Pyrrhosides had the weapon nailed to a standard and held above his command tent outside the city. Once his civilian detachment caught up and finished their business integrating Pathless into the Greek line of communication, the host reformed and set off in search of these distant sea peoples. At this time, too, Spartacus had summoned a similarly large expedition for a task that would prove just as fraught with bloodshed. In the summer of 189, he had brought together the overflowing population of Tanais to found another colony. Only this time his eyes looked beyond the Black Sea. His time in the First Lands had alerted him to the potential profit of the place where the river Ra met the sea. The nature of this sea was unknown to begin with. Through further searching, Spartacus was informed that the sea was in fact the northern reaches of the Hyrcanian Ocean that reached all the way down to the mountains and plains of Parthia and Bactria. It had been thought very widely, and to some extent still is today, that the Hyrcanian Sea was connected directly to the Outer Sea at its northern end. In truth, there is a great landmass of similar nature to the Pontic Steppe, capped by the World's End Forest, which blocks any access to the Outer Sea, if the sea is even present in that direction at all. There's no hope of traversing the forest here, so such things cannot be known. This expedition was accompanied by an army of citizen soldiers, wary of walking to an unmapped place unguarded. This would prove to be wise caution, and we shall return to the tribulations the king brought upon himself in those barbarian lands in our next chapter. The many details of the western effort should concern us for now. By the autumn of 189, Pyrrhosides and company had followed the borders of the World's End Forest to the far northwest. Here the forest was even darker and thicker than before, and progress for the caravan was slow, with few daylight hours to use. But it was the darkness that revealed that others were nearby. The Leuthosis scouts easily detected the presence of interlopers not far within the forest, for campfires still glowed, and torches hurried away from the sounds of horses. Knowing this, Gwenna took many of her people each day to investigate the forests close to the caravan's route, and they found many things that disturbed them. There were sites that had been forest folk villages, now taken by rot and ruin. There were few animals, yet many trails. Humans had been walking through the forest in considerable numbers, and without the discipline to conceal their effect. Then they came upon the place to which all those mysterious figures had fled, a camp on the forest edge where 1,000 or more Helisii men were gathering loot from the old forest villages. This was so enraging to the Leuthosis that Gwenna took them off to raid this camp without even informing the caravan of its existence. Hence a battle was fought in which every man the Leuthosis could find was killed, and assorted trinkets and materials were recovered. What was missing was clear. There were no runestones, either mundane or profound. Once Pyrrhosides brought the rest of the expedition up and learned of all this, he did not scold Gwenna for her insubordination, which she would not have understood, but instead offered an apology. Diotrephes recalled it thus: "Lady of creation, it is I who have made an error. through us your quest has become so widely known that villains begin the quest themselves, perhaps to deny you your prize, or perhaps to turn cosmic wisdom to their own ends. It is we half-men who feel the need to race to undercut others so that an advantage can be preserved, for we have no ability to survive on our own. I then was too hasty to make demands, and I worry now that across this world it is privately known by many that a way to translate ancient runes has come about, and that, moreover, doing so is to speak with the gods directly. Should our quest fail because we were not discreet and subtle about our business, it shall be my fault alone. It seems like Parysates would not speak this way, and that the words Diotrephes records are too deferential for a man of world-spanning spirit. However, the companion also records that Gwenna's reaction was one of shock, moved to tears, and that after relaying the apology to her tribe, they all came to Parysates and bowed in the Greek style, chanting Wenag, which is an ancient word that begot the title of Wanax, which the kings of old Greece held. In short, they were again declaring Parysates to be king, although I remind you once more that a Leuthosis Wenag and a Greek king are different kinds of honours, and there will be a chance to explain this in detail once the action that followed this event is discussed. What should intrigue us is that Parysates understood this already, and his speeches in the Chariskos assembly hint that he had known the truth I allude to here for some time. Thus he was speaking with an adopted style in order to extract precisely the awed reaction from his would-be subjects that he received. What remains to be discussed by scholars, I say, is whether Gwenna had conspired with the prince to achieve the reaction of her people, or whether she was being placed under the prince's spell as they were. We must move on for now. 2 weeks passed, and further evidence of camps and search parties was found. Notably, any forest folk who had lived on these borders seems to have been generations gone, which is not so long a time compared to the thousands of years they had hid there. Instead, it was the settled people of Duna whom the expedition discovered, who came weeks from their city in the thousands to make battle, offering no envoys nor hesitation. They did make arrangements for a baggage train, though it was not with them when they arrived into the vicinity of the Bosporan camp. This may have motivated their haste to attack even further, given that baggage of all kinds were there for the taking. The expeditionary force had more civilians than soldiers by at least a factor of double, and of animals the count might have been double again. The attack came in so unconventionally fast that there was little time for the Bosporans to prepare. They were forced to deploy directly alongside their camp, which was positioned on a small hill surrounded by open ground. Its size, and the ranges of the nearby pasturing animals, created an impossible defensive challenge. One aspect of strategy that we lay people must come to understand, though, is that all factors on the battlefield can be played to one's advantage or disadvantage, and this is true no more or less for strength than for weakness. That is to say, Parysates had a method to make weakness his weapon. Here is what he did. The greater part of the Bosporan camp was on the reverse side of the hill relative to the hasty approach. Therefore, the hollering tribesmen knew that their best prizes awaited on the other side of the rise before them. Parysates took the camp's footmen to the crest of the hill to block any routes up it, while Leuthosis riders went out of the camp in 2 columns to either side of the hill, such that they were like arms held out to oppose passage, or so it must have seemed. The left wing, at Parysates' direction, did not hold its ground, and instead rode out so far from the camp that there was a large gap through which the hasty might flow around the flank of the hill. Furthermore, the riders in this outriding group had their weapons hidden and clothing in disarray, giving the firm impression that the whole army must have been taken by surprise and was unready or unwilling to fight. Happily believing all this, the hasty began to round the hill. Shortly, they found the hillside swarming with light troops, who tortured those below with sling stones and arrows. Many of the soldiers involved in this action were levies from Paltescia, who had been joined to the army as a sort of trade to balance the Bosporan soldiers left to keep peace in the city. This is worthy of mention, since traditional reason would lead one to believe these levies would make for fearful or treacherous soldiers. However, here they gave shining account of the skills of their people, of which no Bosporan was afraid to note in their reports, for indeed it was those same Bosporans who had defeated the Helisii so recently. All told, the fierce attack from the hillside caused the flow of warriors around the base to halt. It was now too late for them to regroup, for the right wing of the Leuthosis had cut a track through the rear of the army, like a tree root through dry earth. Seeing this, the left wing no longer shambled about on the periphery and turned in to be an equal menace. Of the battle that followed, Paereces and Diotrephes both noted a curious detail about the tactical senses of the Leuthosis riders. They were fully able to go about the field this way and that without any orders being provided, and never did they blunder so much as for this to not ultimately be of profit to their commander. However, they conducted this movement in tightly formed blocks, and each block rarely detached entirely from those nearest to it, such that when I describe their army as being like two arms extending from the hill, it is a close simile, with some units of the force being like joints, others like fingers, and all moving together and stopping together, every man responding to the movements of those around him, so that information on the state and intention of the formation was communicated without words. It was impressive enough that a great deal has been written on it, so I shall note only my favourite observation here. It is said that there are two reasons that the Leuthosis rode in such close ranks. The first was to affect the enemy's ability to see the battlefield. The walls of horses caused men on the ground to lose sight of other comrades far away, and the constant movement of these walls tended to give the impression that each warrior was more isolated than they truly were. The second was that the Leuthosis had grown used to fighting in dense forests, even on horseback, providing their mounts with the ability to make the necessary sidesteps and turns to deal with constant obstacles, but perhaps ingraining in their riders the need to constantly be close to something. In the open plains, the warriors at their sides were as sturdy an ally as a tree was in the deep woods. That is what people say anyway. Here then the Aesti were defeated not through contact with the enemy, but by displacement into segmented pockets that attempted to flee the field, and there can be no hope of fleeing from a mounted army, doubly so when Leuthosis' bloodthirst is accounted for. The Aesti often stopped to stand their ground, most likely sensing the futility of retreat, but they were in no state to display talent at arms against singing arrows and fearless horses. Diotrephes noted after the battle how the Leuthosis fought so much more valiantly than other nomad forces he and the prince had seen in action, and came to a reasonable paradox. How could this army exist in the world without having conquered and made a name for itself? From where was its skill drawn, and for what reason was this skill not employed for profit? Some days later, he returned to the topic in a letter to Spartacus, showing a degree of admiration for what he learned. He claims to have brought the matter to Paereces, who took he and the question both before Gwena Greekspeaker. The answer lay in the notion of paragons, which, recall, was a central feature of Leuthosis religion. It served there not only to anchor the people to righteous behaviour, but to educate them with wisdom that life does not easily give. Their knowledge of battle stemmed from tales of heroes, held aloft such that we might think they were gods at first, and then from the determination of each individual to live as their favourite heroes did, putting this before their own will. Thus it was not what they will do that concerned them primarily, and instead what they should do, in order to earn the favour of a divine paragon. It is, on reflection, possible that their habit of riding in overly close ranks was the will of such a deity. It is very difficult to ascertain the truth on these matters, because, as those witty among you might foresee, there were like lessons from the gods that taught them to cultivate these powers of the mind only for themselves, and deny them from others. And even here, amid the bonds of war, the Bosporans and even their prince were not privy to the full pantheon of ideals, and nor are most people even today. But while this is fascinating, we must carry on, leaving time for only a single incision of interest in the form of a question. The paragon gods were once men, so what might become of men alive today whose prestige reaches similar heights? I speculate that the prince had asked this same question and received the answer, be it from Gwena or Zeus. The expedition was slowed greatly after this battle by the coming of snows, early and deep, and this was not an insignificant challenge to overcome. The camp was drawn up only a week north of the prior battlefield, and there it was forced to stay. Their path had veered east to be closer to the deep woods, providing an endless supply of firewood, but almost nothing in the way of game. The northern forests were more barren than the southern, perhaps on account of the dark spirits that make these parts of the world their home. Only the horses could survive in these conditions, and the sheep were brought in for slaughter, even though this would make the coming year difficult for everyone. Since the winter here was rather long, time moves slowly when the fabric of the world is so cold, the supply of animal products was insufficient, and the possibility of dire hunger fell upon the 8,000-strong camp. Fortune would not have this, and a solution was delivered, purportedly summoned by the strong loss of life from the butchering of livestock. It was a band of riders from the forest, who of course turned out to be something similar to the Leuthosis, only of the kind found in these reaches where the deep wood faces west instead of south. There was mutual recognition, and the meeting did not lead to any trouble. It was a week before more arrived, including chiefs to represent them in discussion, and those finely crafted forest wagons with provisions and clothing for the camp to enjoy. I will note that while I will describe the group making contact here as a single people, they were truthfully a coalition of different Manos-worshipping tribes from the frontier of Europe, who had been driven together in recent years. Since the Greeks tended to treat them all as one people, and this serves our needs well enough, I shall use a group term as if they were a singular mind from now on. After all, we are happy to say Greeks when truly no such single people exists. These new Leuthosis were so long disconnected from the groups on the steppe frontier that their language was virtually impossible for Gwena's people to understand. However, the intellectuals of both tribes were literate in the old runes, and hence a long-winded audience began, in which speeches and rejoinders were transcribed and passed back and forth. This, readers, is to the boon of those with a love of history, for we are able to access the papyrus used in these events and get an unerring account of what was said. I will shortly show you a quote from the most important passage of this meeting. First, to summarize what was learned here, this forest tribe, whom I shall call the Dunagol, meaning camped near Duna, had been hunted by the Asti tribe and other bands from the European forests. The reason for this was starkly provided. It was because people had learned that runestones were being sought after, and hence they sought after them themselves. This we already knew. The Dunagol brought blame to the feet of Parysatis and Gwena, and found it had been placed there already by the same. There was an exchange on the matter of reparation for the damages, in which Parysatis offered things the Dunagol were not interested in, amounting to gaining rights to citizenship which they did not need, and the implicit burdens of tax for those rights. Gwena offered nothing at all, and furthermore refused to accept any blame for the loss of life and home her quest had prompted. For how she justified this tyrannical stance, I shall bring you this word-for-word quote. "Suffering is the currency of progress. Were it not, we would be lesser than the gods, but nay, we are the greater. Who bears the weight of the act in these cases? That is simple. It has always been the great leaders. This case is no different. Your people have been torn apart so that your children can know a better world. Understand this. Were this not to happen, it would be a crime, so I have no remorse. No one who understands the world does. Yet, since crimes have been committed on this path, we have our king to bear them, and his blood will be like the harvest of a new world. Have you forgotten this?" This entreaty was highly successful and assuaged doubts quickly. I will note that at the time of this exchange, the prince, or king if you prefer, could not read the communiques. How would he have reacted had he known his blood was being plumped up for winter, as it were? This matter will return. The answer to Gwena's final question, "Have you forgotten this?" was no. The Dunagol had, like the Morrow, preserved their own slice of the culture that all these forest people once shared, and in particular, they had retained the same notion of kingship that Gwena's tribe had, the king being a great leader who gives up their lives for the people, and now, in the light of Gwena's own words, we can perhaps understand that there was more to this than mere virtue in high office. The Dunagol reported that their own piece of the runestone truth pertained to this topic, and so it was more than paragon memory or mere luck of cloudy cultural flow. Yet the stones had been successfully pilfered by the Aesti raiders, and this, in combination with their curiosity about Gwenna's sin-bearing king, brought the Donegal into quick and easy alliance with the expedition. The route from here to Duna would be quick, using forest roads and caches of supplies that had previously been reserved for the Donegal's survival. That they gave these up to sustain this foreign horde for only a single season tells us that they were either entirely sold on Pyricedes' brilliance, or the vice of gambling had stabbed them in the heart, and stomach too. Thus the Bosporans came upon the outer sea, and found it to be grey and rough, unlike seas intended for human use. The city of Duna was a harbour on this sea, and while harbours often swell their cities to impressive heights, this place was lowly and wanting severely for worked stone. This goes to show the folly of obsessing over the outer sea, as some do today. Although I have heard of places where these endeavours are not entirely miserable, this occurs when the waters of the outer and inner seas mix, such as in the far west of the inner sea, causing the outer sea to be purer and carry the warmth of life more readily. After waiting for the first day of the year in which the ground was thawed by the morning light, the military elements of the expedition went to challenge the city. They could not have gone sooner, for this place was host to an army as large as the one fought in the autumn, and composed of warriors of a richer class. They were often armed with shields from chin to foot, and wore chainmail of a Gallic style that one can most easily buy from the markets of Massalia. It is said that ships from this northern redoubt sometimes circumvented the world to enter the inner sea in the aforementioned western reaches where this is usually possible. This army marched along the coast to the fringes of the forest where the Bosporans were gathering, in an area that was not well suited to a pitched battle. The Aesti had learned to avoid open spaces, or been reminded of it in the strongest terms, and now sought advantage actively, awakened to their weaknesses. It is in these times, after a defeat, that armies can perform their best, which most commanders fail to anticipate. This requires active leadership and a pressing desire for victory that is shared between the highest and lowest ranks, which was achieved here by the thirst for wealth and knowledge the age of the runestones had brought to Europe. Therefore, no easy victory could be enjoyed, and the Leuthosis would be compelled to rejuvenate the earth with their own storied blood.